You are lying in the dark, wrapped in wool that smells faintly of tar and salt, and the cold presses against your face like a living thing. It seeps through the cracks in the wood above you, slides beneath the thin barrier of your blanket, settles into the hollows of your collarbone and the space behind your knees. This is not the clean, sharp cold of a winter morning on land, where you might wake to frost on the window and the promise of a fire in the hearth. This is the cold of the open ocean, damp and relentless, a cold that has traveled across thousands of miles of water to find you here, in this narrow berth, aboard a ship that creaks and groans as it moves through the black Atlantic night. The year is 1843, though it could be any year in the long century of wooden sailing ships, when men went to sea for months or years at a time and learned to sleep in conditions that would seem impossible to those who have only ever known the comfort of heated rooms and soft mattresses. You are a sailor, one among dozens aboard a merchant vessel bound for distant ports, and this cramped cabin in the forecastle is your home now, the place where you retreat when your watch is done and your body demands rest, even as the cold and the motion of the sea conspire to keep you from finding it. Before we go further into this night, into the particular details of how you and your crewmates manage to sleep in these freezing quarters, let me invite you to subscribe to this channel. Here, you'll find stories designed to ease you into deep, restful sleep while quietly expanding your understanding of history, science, and the human experience. These are narratives crafted for the curious mind that wants to learn something meaningful even as it drifts toward unconsciousness. By subscribing, you ensure that more of these thoughtfully researched stories will find their way to you, each one a companion for those nights when you seek both comfort and knowledge. And as you listen tonight, you'll discover how sailors in the age of sail endured conditions that tested the limits of human endurance, how they adapted and survived, and how their experience connects to the broader story of life at sea. So if you haven't already, take a moment now to subscribe, and then settle back into your own warm bed as we return to that cold cabin and the world of those who slept in freezing quarters far from home. The cabin where you sleep is located in the forecastle, the forward section of the ship, beneath the main deck. It is a space perhaps 20 feet long and 15 feet wide, though the exact dimensions vary from vessel to vessel, and it houses anywhere from 12 to 20 men depending on the size of the crew and the generosity of the captain. The ceiling, if you can call it that, is barely 5 feet high in most places, lower where the curve of the hull angles inward, so that you learn quickly to move in a perpetual crouch, your spine curved, your head tilted, your body always aware of the proximity of hardwood above and around you. There are no windows here. The only light comes from a single oil lamp that swings gently from a beam, casting shadows that shift and waver with the motion of the ship, making the already cramped space feel even smaller, more enclosed, as though the walls are breathing in and out in time with the waves. During the day, when the hatch is open and sunlight slants down the ladder, you can see the space more clearly, the rows of narrow bunks built into the walls, stacked 2 or 3 high depending on the design, each bunk just wide enough for a man to lie on his back with his arms at his sides, just long enough for a body of average height, and nothing more. There is no privacy, no personal space beyond the wooden shelf that serves as your bed and the canvas sack where you keep your few possessions, a spare shirt, a clasp knife, a letter from someone you left behind. But now it is night, and the hatch is battened down against the weather, and the lamp burns low to conserve oil, and you can barely make out the shapes of your crewmates in their bunks, some already asleep, others shifting restlessly, trying to find a position that might offer some small measure of comfort. The air is thick with the mingled smells of unwashed bodies, damp wool, tobacco smoke, and the ever-present odor of bilge water that rises from the lowest part of the ship, a sour, organic smell that you have learned to tolerate, though you never quite stop noticing it. The cold is what dominates your awareness now. It rises from the wooden planks beneath your bunk, seeps through the hull just inches from your head, radiates down from the deck above where seawater sloshes and drains through the gaps. Your breath forms small clouds in the dim lamplight, visible proof of the temperature, and you pull your blanket tighter around your shoulders, tucking the edges beneath your body to seal in whatever warmth you have managed to generate. The blanket is wool, thick and heavy when dry but never quite dry aboard a ship at sea, always holding some percentage of moisture from the constant humidity, from the spray that comes over the rail during rough weather, from the condensation that forms on every surface when the temperature drops. You are wearing nearly all the clothes you own, a pair of thick woolen trousers, a cotton shirt, a woolen vest, a woolen jacket, and woolen socks that you have pulled up as high as they will go beneath your trouser legs. Some men sleep in their boots, preferring the added warmth to the discomfort of having hard leather against their skin all night, but you have chosen to remove yours, setting them carefully at the foot of your bunk where you can find them quickly if you are called to duty in the middle of the night. Your knit cap is pulled down over your ears, and you have wrapped a woolen scarf around your neck, so that only your face is exposed to the cold air, and even then you have drawn the blanket up to your nose, breathing into the small warm pocket of air beneath the wool. This is how sailors sleep in freezing cabins at sea, and this is how you have learned to sleep over the weeks and months of this voyage, and this is how men have slept aboard ships for centuries, adapting their bodies and their expectations to conditions that would seem unbearable to those who have never ventured beyond the sight of land. There is an art to it, a set of unwritten rules and small strategies that you have absorbed through observation and experience, and as you lie here in the dark, waiting for sleep to come despite the cold and the constant motion of the ship, you find yourself thinking about these strategies, cataloging them in your mind, as though by naming them you might gain some small mastery over the discomfort. The first and most important principle is layering. You have learned that a single thick garment, no matter how heavy, is less effective than multiple thinner layers, because the air trapped between the layers provides insulation, creating barriers against the cold. This is why you wear your shirt beneath your vest beneath your jacket, and why you have traded with another sailor for an extra pair of socks that you wear over the first pair, creating a double layer against the chill that rises from the wooden slats of your bunk. Some men wear 2 sets of long underwear, one over the other, and those who can afford it or who have been at sea long enough to accumulate extra clothing might wear 3 or even 4 layers on their upper body, adding a flannel shirt between the cotton and the wool, wrapping themselves like parcels against the elements. The second principle is dryness, though achieving dryness aboard a ship at sea is a challenge that can rarely be fully met. Wet clothing draws heat away from the body, and wool, despite its reputation for warmth, becomes heavy and cold when saturated. You have learned to hang your garments near the galley stove when you have the opportunity, to drape them over the edge of your bunk where the faint warmth from the bodies of the men below might help to dry them, to turn them inside out so that the dampest parts are exposed to whatever air circulates through the cabin. But the air itself is damp, thick with moisture from the sea and from the breath and sweat of the men, so nothing ever truly dries, and you have come to accept a state of perpetual slight dampness as the normal condition of your clothing, your blankets, your bedding. The third principle is conserving body heat, which means minimizing movement once you have settled into your bunk, because every time you shift position you disturb the warm envelope of air that has gradually formed around you beneath the blankets. You have learned to lie very still, to breathe slowly and shallowly so as not to draw too much cold air into your lungs, to keep your hands tucked beneath your armpits or between your thighs where the larger muscles generate more heat. Some men sleep curled on their sides in a tight ball, knees drawn up to their chests, arms wrapped around themselves, creating the smallest possible surface area exposed to the cold. Others, like you, prefer to lie on their backs, which allows for better breathing and seems to reduce the aches and pains that come from spending hours in a cramped position, but this requires a greater tolerance for cold, because more of your body is spread out against the thin mattress, more of your surface area is exposed to the air. The mattress, if it can be called that, is a canvas sack stuffed with straw or horsehair, rarely more than 2 or 3 inches thick, compressed over time by the weight of your body until it provides only the thinnest barrier between you and the wooden slats beneath. Some ships provide these mattresses as part of the standard equipment, while on others each sailor is expected to provide his own, purchasing or fashioning a mattress before the voyage begins. Yours is filled with straw that has become compacted and broken, losing its springiness, so that you can feel the hard edges of the slats through the canvas, pressing against your shoulders, your hips, your heels. In warmer waters this would be merely uncomfortable, but in the cold it is another pathway for heat to escape your body, another surface drawing warmth away into the fabric of the ship itself. You shift slightly, trying to find a position where the pressure of the slats is less pronounced, and the wooden frame of your bunk creaks with the movement, a small sound that is nevertheless distinct in the relative quiet of the cabin. Around you, other sounds form the constant background of life aboard the ship, the snoring of the men already asleep, the wet coughing of someone fighting a chest cold, the low murmur of conversation from two sailors in bunks near the lamp who are not yet ready to sleep, the scrabbling of rats in the bilge below, the endless creaking and groaning of the ship itself as it works through the waves, every timber and plank flexing and rubbing against its neighbors, every rope and chain shifting in its housing. And beneath all of this, the sound of the water, the deep rushing whisper of the ocean sliding past the hull just inches from your head, a sound so constant that it becomes a kind of silence, a baseline against which all other sounds are measured. You have grown so accustomed to this sound that you no longer consciously hear it, yet you would notice instantly if it stopped, if the ship suddenly ceased its forward motion and the water fell silent. It is the sound of progress, of distance being covered, of the ship doing what it was built to do, and there is something reassuring in it, even as you lie here cold and uncomfortable, because it means you are moving toward your destination, toward the day when you will step off this vessel and onto solid ground and sleep in a bed that does not move beneath you. But that day is still weeks away, perhaps months depending on the weather and the success of the voyage, and so you do what sailors have always done, you adapt, you endure, you find ways to make the unbearable bearable. You think about the men who shared this cabin before you, who slept in this very bunk perhaps, and the men who will come after, and you take a strange comfort in the continuity of it, in the knowledge that this experience, as difficult as it is, connects you to a long tradition of seafaring, to the countless sailors who have faced the same cold, the same discomfort, the same challenge of finding rest in conditions that seem designed to prevent it. Your thoughts begin to slow, to drift, even as the cold continues to press against you. You have been awake for nearly 20 hours, having stood watch through the afternoon and evening, and the exhaustion is finally beginning to overcome the discomfort. You can feel your body starting to relax despite the cold, your muscles releasing their tension, your breathing deepening. This is another adaptation, another way that sailors learn to sleep at sea. They become so profoundly tired that sleep claims them even in the most inhospitable conditions, the body overriding the mind's protests about cold and hardness and dampness, insisting on the rest it needs to function when the next watch comes and duty calls you back to the deck. You are aware, in a distant way, that your feet are cold, that your nose is cold, that there is a chill along your left side where you are pressed against the hull. But these sensations are beginning to fade, becoming less immediate, less urgent, as the first thin veil of sleep begins to descend. You do not fight it. You have learned not to fight it, because fighting only keeps you awake longer, only makes the cold feel worse. Instead you surrender to it, you let yourself sink into that cold dark water of unconsciousness, trusting that your body knows what it needs, that it will take what rest it can get and make use of it. The lamp sputters, burns lower. Someone coughs. The ship rolls gently to starboard, and the water rushes past the hull with a sound like breathing, and you are no longer quite sure whether you are awake or asleep, whether the images forming in your mind are thoughts or dreams, and it doesn't matter, because you are here, in this place, in this moment, and this is how sailors sleep in freezing cabins at sea, and you are one of them, and sleep is coming now, slow and cold and deep as the ocean itself, and you let it carry you down into the dark. You wake before dawn, as you always do now, to the slow creak of timber and the muffled groan of water against the hull. The darkness in the cabin is absolute, a thickness that presses against your eyelids even when they open, and for a moment you lie still beneath the coarse wool blanket, feeling the cold air settle on your face like a damp cloth. The blanket itself is thin, worn from years of use by men whose names you will never know, and it carries the faint smell of tar and salt and something else, something human and tired that has soaked into its fibers over countless voyages. You pull it closer to your chin, though it does little against the cold that has already found its way through your shirt, your skin, down into the marrow of your bones. The cabin is small, barely wide enough for the narrow bunk you occupy and the two others stacked against the opposite wall. You share this space with 5 other men, though in the dark you cannot see them, only hear the shallow rhythm of their breathing, the occasional cough or muttered word from someone caught in a dream. The air smells of damp wood and unwashed bodies, of bilge water and the faint residue of the salt pork you ate hours ago, and beneath it all there is the ever-present scent of the sea itself, briny and cold, seeping through every crack and seam in the ship's planking. The ship is a merchant vessel, a three-masted bark bound for the northern fishing grounds, and you are one of the ordinary seamen, part of a crew of 23 souls who live and work in the narrow margins between the deck above and the cargo hold below. You have been at sea for 11 days now, and the cold has become a constant companion, a presence that never leaves, not even in sleep. During the day, when you work the rigging or haul on the lines, the exertion warms you, sends blood rushing through your limbs, but here in the cabin, in the hours stolen for rest, there is no escape from it. The ship is sailing through waters where winter still holds dominion, where the air carries the memory of ice even as spring begins to unfold in the lands you left behind, and the cold finds its way into everything, into the wood, the canvas, the iron fittings, and into the men who huddle in the dim spaces below deck, trying to gather what warmth they can. You sit up slowly, careful not to strike your head on the low ceiling, and your breath forms a pale cloud in the darkness. The bunk beneath you is a simple wooden frame with a thin straw mattress, and the straw has compressed over time into a mat no thicker than your hand, offering little cushion against the hard boards. You swing your legs over the edge and place your feet on the deck, feeling the cold of the planks rise through your socks. Your boots stand beside the bunk, stiff with salt and damp, and you pull them on one at a time, lacing them by feel, your fingers clumsy in the chill. Above you, you hear the muted tread of footsteps, the watch changing, and the distant call of the officer on deck. It is still dark outside, you know, the hour before the first gray light begins to seep over the horizon, but the ship does not sleep, not truly. There is always someone on watch, always someone tending the helm or scanning the water, and soon you will be called to join them, to take your place in the rhythm of shipboard life that pulses on without pause. You reach for the lantern that hangs from a hook near your bunk, but you do not light it. The cabin is too small, too crowded, and the risk of fire is one that every sailor carries in the back of his mind, a fear that lives alongside the fear of storms and foundering. Instead, you feel your way along the rough timber wall, your hand trailing over the knots and grain, until you reach the narrow ladder that leads up to the deck. The ladder is steep and slick with moisture, and you climb it carefully, one rung at a time, until you push open the hatch and step out into the open air. The cold strikes you immediately, sharper here than below, and the wind carries with it the bite of the north, a wind that has traveled over ice and open water to reach this ship. The sky is still dark, but there is a faint line of lighter gray along the eastern edge, a promise of dawn that has not yet arrived. The deck is wet, slick with spray and the condensation that forms on every surface, and you can see the shapes of other men moving in the dimness, shadows wrapped in oilskins and woolen jackets, their breath rising in faint plumes. You make your way aft, toward the helm, where the second mate stands with one hand on the wheel, his face turned into the wind. He glances at you as you approach, nods once, and you take your place beside him, ready to relieve him when the bell rings. The ship rises and falls beneath your feet, a slow and rhythmic motion that you have come to know as intimately as your own heartbeat, and you brace yourself against the rail, feeling the cold metal through your gloves. The sea stretches out around you in all directions, a vast expanse of dark water that blends into the sky at the horizon, and for a moment you feel the weight of it, the sheer immensity of this world you have entered, a world where the land is only a memory and the ship is the only solid thing beneath your feet. You have been on ships before, many times, but this feeling never quite leaves, this sense of smallness, of being held in the palm of something far greater than yourself. The mate murmurs something about the wind, about the course, and you nod, storing the information away. The wind is steady, coming from the northwest, and the ship is making good progress, her sails taut and full, the rigging singing a low note that rises and falls with the gusts. You will hold this course until the captain orders otherwise, and in the meantime, you will stand your watch, keeping your eyes on the horizon, your hands ready at the wheel, your mind half occupied with thoughts of the cabin below, of the narrow bunk and the thin blanket and the cold that waits there, patient and unrelenting. The bell rings, for chimes that echo across the deck, and the mate steps aside, letting you take the wheel. You wrap your hands around the worn wood, feeling the ship respond to your touch, a living thing that moves with the wind and the water, and you settle into the rhythm of it, letting the motion of the sea flow through you, letting the cold and the dark and the vastness of the ocean become part of the background, part of the fabric of this life you have chosen. Sleeping on a ship in these latitudes, in this era before steam and insulation and the comforts that would come later, was not a matter of luxury or even of simple rest. It was a negotiation, a careful balancing of need and circumstance, of finding whatever small warmth could be found and holding onto it through the night. The sailors who served on merchant vessels and fishing boats and naval ships in the 18th and 19th centuries learned early that sleep was something to be earned, not expected, and that the cold would be their companion whether they welcomed it or not. The cabins where you and your fellow seamen sleep are located below the main deck, in the forward part of the ship, far from the officers' quarters at the stern. This is the focsle, the forecastle, a cramped and often damp space that serves as both dormitory and refuge for the ordinary crew. The name itself is a remnant of older ships, where the forecastle was a raised platform at the bow used for defense, but on this vessel it is simply the space where the men are housed, a low-ceilinged compartment divided by rough partitions into sleeping areas. The bunks are arranged in tiers, stacked 2 or 3 high against the walls, and each man is allotted a space barely wider than his shoulders and just long enough to lie flat. There are no doors, no privacy, only the shared darkness and the shared cold and the unspoken understanding that this is what you have, and you must make do. The bunks are built of simple pine or oak, the wood unfinished and splintered in places, and each frame holds a thin mattress stuffed with straw or horsehair, depending on the ship's provision and the generosity, or lack thereof, of its owners. Some ships provide a single blanket for each man, a rough woolen thing that sheds fibers and holds moisture, while others expect the sailors to bring their own bedding, a collection of whatever can be carried in a canvas bag, a spare shirt, an old coat, a length of sailcloth to wrap around oneself. You have learned to sleep in your clothes, to keep your jacket on and your hat pulled low, because the act of undressing in this cold is not only uncomfortable but dangerous, a risk of losing what little warmth your body has managed to generate. The temperature in the cabin is difficult to measure in any precise way, but you know it by feel, by the way your breath hangs visible in the air, by the dampness that clings to the walls and drips from the overhead beams. On particularly cold nights, when the ship is sailing through northern waters or when a storm brings wind from the Arctic, the temperature inside the cabin may be only a few degrees warmer than the air outside, and the moisture from the men's breath condenses on every surface, forming a slick film of ice on the metal fittings and a damp chill that penetrates wool and canvas and skin. You have heard stories from older sailors, men who served on whalers in the Greenland fishery or on naval vessels patrolling the northern reaches, of nights when the cold was so intense that the water in the ship's casks froze solid, when the men had to break ice from their blankets in the morning, when frostbite claimed fingers and toes and noses. You have not experienced such extremes yourself, not yet, but you carry the knowledge of them, the awareness that the sea is not a forgiving place and that the cold is one of its many tools. The ship moves constantly, of course, and this motion affects every aspect of sleep. When the sea is calm, the rocking is gentle, a slow rise and fall that can lull you into drowsiness, but when the weather turns and the waves grow, the ship pitches and rolls, and you must brace yourself in your bunk to avoid being thrown to the deck. Some men sleep with one arm hooked through the rope netting that hangs along the side of the bunk, a makeshift restraint that keeps them from tumbling out, while others wedge themselves against the hull, using the curve of the ship's timbers as a brace. The noise is constant as well, a symphony of creaks and groans and snaps, the sound of wood flexing under strain, of water slapping against the hull, of wind whistling through the rigging. At first, when you were new to the sea, these sounds kept you awake, filled you with a vague unease, but over time you have learned to hear them differently, to recognize the normal sounds of a ship at work and to distinguish them from the warning signs of trouble. Now, the creaking of the masts and the slosh of bilge water below are almost comforting, a reminder that the ship is holding together, that she is doing her job, carrying you across the water toward whatever destination the captain has set. But the cold remains the central fact of sleeping below deck, the thing that shapes every decision, every movement. You learn quickly that lying still is better than thrashing about, because movement only stirs the air and lets the warmth escape from beneath your blanket. You learn to curl into yourself, to draw your knees up and tuck your hands under your arms, to breathe shallowly so that the heat from your lungs does not dissipate too quickly. You learn to share warmth when possible, to sleep pressed against the man next to you, shoulder to shoulder, without shame or discomfort, because in this place, survival takes precedence over modesty. There are no stoves in the FOCSLE, no braziers or fires, because the risk of sparks igniting the tar-soaked wood or the canvas sails stored nearby is too great. Fire at sea is a terror that every sailor understands, a disaster that can consume a ship in minutes, leaving the crew with nothing but the cold water and the slim hope of rescue. So the men endure the cold, they wrap themselves as best they can, and they sleep in shifts, taking what rest they can between watches, between the demands of the ship and the demands of the sea. You remember your first night aboard this ship, the shock of the cold, the way it seemed to seep into your chest and settle there, making every breath feel labored. You lay in your bunk, shivering despite the blanket, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, feeling the ship move beneath you, and you wondered if you would ever grow accustomed to it. But you did, because the body adapts, because the mind learns to accept what cannot be changed, and because the alternative, to dwell on the discomfort, to resist the cold with every fiber of your being, is a path that leads only to exhaustion and despair. The other men in the cabin are a varied lot, drawn from ports across the Atlantic, some English, some Irish, a few from the American colonies, one from Portugal. They speak different languages, or at least different versions of the same language, their accents thick and sometimes difficult to parse, but the shared experience of the ship creates a common ground, a vocabulary of gesture and routine that transcends words. You know them by their habits, by the way they move in the cramped space, by the sounds they make in sleep. There is Thomas, the oldest of the group, a man perhaps 40 years of age, though it is hard to tell, because the sea ages men in ways that the land does not. His face is weathered, lined with deep creases, and his hands are knotted with calluses and old scars. He sleeps in the lower bunk nearest the ladder, and he is always the first to wake, always the first to rise and make his way on deck, moving with a quiet efficiency that speaks of decades at sea. He does not complain about the cold, does not speak of it at all, and you have learned to follow his example, to accept it as part of the bargain you made when you signed on. There is William, younger than you by a few years, a wiry boy with red hair and a quick temper. He is from Liverpool, or so he says, and he talks constantly when he is awake, filling the silence with stories and jokes and complaints, but in sleep he is quiet, his face smoothing into an expression of peace that you rarely see when his eyes are open. He sleeps in the bunk above yours, and sometimes in the night you hear him murmur fragments of words that make no sense, and you wonder what he dreams of, whether it is the sea or the home he left behind. There is Michael, the Irishman, who sings when he works, old ballads in a language you do not understand but that carry a sadness so profound it needs no translation. He sleeps restlessly, tossing and turning, and more than once you have been woken by his elbow or his foot, but you do not begrudge him. Sleep is difficult for everyone, and each man copes in his own way. And there are others, men whose names you have learned but whose stories remain mostly unspoken, because there is little time for conversation, little opportunity for the sharing of histories. You work together, you sleep in the same space, but the intimacy is one of proximity, not of revelation, and you are content with that, because the ship demands focus, demands that you be present in each moment, and there is little energy left for anything else. The daily rhythm of life on the ship is governed by the watches, 4-hour shifts that rotate throughout the day and night, ensuring that there are always men on deck to handle the sails, to steer, to keep watch for other vessels or hazards. You stand your watch, then you are released, and you make your way below to the cabin, to the narrow bunk, to the cold and the dark and the hope of a few hours rest before you are called again. The transition from waking to sleeping is not always smooth. Often you lie awake, your body exhausted but your mind unwilling to surrender, replaying the events of the watch, the sharp word from the mate, the moment when the wind shifted and you had to scramble to adjust the sails, the sight of a whale surfacing far off the starboard side, its back glistening in the pale light. The ship is a world unto itself, and the events of each day, though they may seem small, carry a weight that the mind does not easily release. Sometimes you think of the land, of the town you left behind, of the narrow streets and the smell of bread baking and the sound of church bells on Sunday morning. You think of the people you knew, the faces that have already begun to blur in your memory, and you wonder if they think of you, if they remember your name, if they imagine where you might be. But these thoughts are fleeting, because the present is too immediate, too demanding, and the cold has a way of bringing you back, of reminding you that this, here, now, is where you are, and this is what you must endure. The ship's cook provides meals twice a day, a breakfast of porridge or hard biscuit and coffee, and a supper of salt pork or beef, sometimes with peas or beans if the stores allow. The food is plain, often bland, and the coffee is weak, more water than flavor, but it is hot, and you cradle the tin mug in your hands, letting the warmth seep into your palms, savoring it as long as you can before the liquid cools. There is no dining room, no table, only a bench or a corner of the deck where the men gather, eating quickly, standing or crouching, before returning to their duties. The act of eating becomes another small ritual in the fight against the cold. You eat slowly when you can, letting each bite sit on your tongue, feeling the heat of it, letting it travel down your throat and into your stomach, a small core of warmth that you try to preserve. Some men eat in silence, focused entirely on the task, while others talk, their voices rising and falling, filling the space with noise that feels, in its own way, like a kind of warmth. There are techniques, small strategies that the sailors have developed over generations, for managing the cold and for improving the quality of sleep, however slightly. You learn these not from formal instruction but from observation, from watching the older men, from trial and error, from the quiet exchange of tips in the moments before sleep. One such technique is the careful arrangement of clothing. You learn to layer, to wear your thinnest shirt closest to your skin and to add the heavier garments on top, so that the warmth your body generates is trapped between the layers. You learn to keep your hat on, because more heat is lost through the head than through any other part of the body, or so the old sailors say, and whether this is true or merely superstition, you follow the advice because it seems to help. You learn to tuck your trousers into your socks, to button your jacket all the way to the collar, to wrap a scarf or a length of cloth around your neck, creating as many barriers as possible between your skin and the air. Another technique is the use of additional materials, anything that can add a layer of insulation. Some men bring oilskins into the cabin and spread them over their blankets, creating a barrier that holds in a bit more warmth, though the oilskins are stiff and crinkle with every movement, and the sound can be irritating in the quiet of the night. Others use spare sails or lengths of canvas, folding them into makeshift quilts, and though canvas is not particularly warm, it does block some of the drafts that seep through the cracks in the hull. You learn, too, the importance of dryness. Wet clothing is the enemy of warmth, and the constant spray and the dampness of the ship mean that staying dry is a challenge. You hang your wet things when you can, draping them over the edge of your bunk or over a rope strung across the cabin, hoping they will dry before you need to wear them again, though often they do not. You learn to wring out your socks as best you can, to shake the moisture from your jacket, to accept that damp is a condition you will live with, but to try nonetheless to minimize it. Some sailors, particularly those on longer voyages or on ships that venture into the coldest waters, bring what are called sleeping bags, though these are nothing like the insulated sacks of later eras. These are simple tubes of canvas or heavy cloth, sewn shut at one end, into which a man can crawl, pulling the open end closed around his shoulders. They are cumbersome and not particularly effective, but they do provide an additional layer, and in the coldest nights, every layer matters. And there is the practice of shared warmth, the decision to sleep close to another man, to press your back against his, to share body heat in a way that is pragmatic rather than intimate. This is common on the coldest nights, and there is no shame in it, no judgment, because everyone understands that survival is a communal effort, that the ship and the sea care nothing for individual pride. You have slept this way several times, curled against Thomas or William, feeling the warmth of another human body seep through the layers of cloth, and though it is not comfortable, not exactly, it is better than shivering alone, and in the morning you wake with a stiffness in your joints but without the bone-deep chill that comes from a night spent in isolation. The ship herself plays a role in how the men sleep, in the quality of rest they can find. Some vessels are better built than others, with tighter seams and fewer drafts, with cabins that are slightly larger or slightly better ventilated, and the sailors know these differences and speak of them when they gather in port, comparing ships the way others might compare inns or lodgings. A ship with a reputation for being tight and dry will attract better crew, while one known for leaking or for having cramped, miserable quarters will struggle to find men willing to sign on. This ship, the one you are on now, is somewhere in the middle. She is not the worst you have served on, but neither is she the best. Her timbers are sound, her hull well caulked, but there are places where the planking has shrunk, leaving gaps through which the wind whistles and the spray finds its way. The FOCSLE is cramped, as all FOCSLEs are, but the bunks are sturdy, and the overhead beams are thick enough that you do not fear the deck collapsing under the weight of the watch above. The officers' quarters, you know, are far more comfortable, though you have only glimpsed them once, when you were sent aft to deliver a message to the captain. There, the ceilings are higher, the bunks wider, and there are stoves, small iron affairs that burn coal or wood and provide a steady heat. The officers sleep under heavier blankets, in cabins that are partitioned for privacy, and though you do not resent them this, not exactly, you are aware of the disparity, aware that the ship is a hierarchy not only of rank but of comfort. Still, even the officers are not immune to the cold, not entirely. The stoves provide warmth, yes, but they must be tended, and fuel is not unlimited, and there are nights when the wind is so fierce and the cold so penetrating that even the best heated cabin feels merely tolerable rather than warm. The sea is a leveler in its way, a force that reminds everyone, from the captain to the cabin boy, that they are subject to its whims, that the comforts of the land are distant and unattainable. There are nights when sleep does not come easily, when the cold or the motion of the ship or the noise from above keeps you awake, and on those nights you lie in your bunk and listen. You listen to the breathing of the men around you, the slow inhale and exhale, the occasional snore or cough. You listen to the ship, to the creak of the masts, the slap of water against the hull, the distant clang of a bell marking the half hour. You listen to the wind, to the way it rises and falls, to the way it hums through the rigging, and you try to read it, to understand what it is telling you about the weather, about what the next watch will bring. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the darkness is complete and the ship seems to hang suspended between the water and the sky, you listen to your own thoughts, to the quiet voice inside that speaks of home and longing and the strange, inexplicable choice you made to leave the land and come to sea. You do not regret it, not exactly, but there are moments when the weight of it settles on you, when you feel the immensity of the ocean and the smallness of your place in it, and you wonder what drove you here, what restlessness or curiosity or simple need for work led you to sign your name on the ship's articles and step aboard. But these thoughts, too, pass, because the cold is patient and the night is long, and eventually your body's need for rest overrides your mind's restlessness, and you slip into a shallow, fitful sleep, a sleep that is more absence than true rest, but that is enough, just enough, to carry you through to the next day. The morning comes slowly, announced first by the faint lightening of the darkness outside, then by the sound of the watch changing on deck, the tread of boots, the call of orders. You wake to the same cold you fell asleep in, the same damp air, the same ache in your muscles, and you rise because there is no alternative, because the ship does not wait, because the sea is indifferent to your comfort or your weariness. You pull on your boots, still damp, still stiff, and you make your way up the ladder to the deck, where the wind meets you like a slap, sharp and bracing. The sun is just beginning to rise, a pale disk on the eastern horizon, and the light it casts is thin and gray, illuminating a world of water and sky that stretches out in all directions, endless and unchanging. You take your place among the crew, ready to begin another day, another watch, another cycle of work and rest, and you carry with you the memory of the night, the cold and the dark in the narrow bunk, and you know that tonight you will return to it, and the night after that, and the night after that, until the voyage is done and you step once more onto solid ground. But for now, there is the deck beneath your feet, the wind in your face, the taste of salt on your lips, and the knowledge that you are alive, that you are here, that you are part of this ship and this crew, bound together by the shared experience of the sea, by the cold and the work and the strange, quiet camaraderie that grows in the spaces between words. And in this moment, as the sun rises and the ship moves forward, cutting through the gray water, you find a kind of peace, a sense that this is where you are meant to be, at least for now, and that the cold, for all its discomfort, is simply part of the bargain, part of the price you pay for this life, this freedom. this connection to something larger and older and more enduring than yourself. The ship sails on, and you with her, and the cold remains, patient and constant, waiting for the night to come again. You wake in the middle watch to the sound of breathing, not your own, but the collective rhythm of 12 men packed into a space barely large enough for 6. The air is thick despite the cold, heavy with exhaled breath that turns to frost on the overhead beams before morning. Someone coughs, a wet sound that echoes in the darkness, and you lie still, waiting for your body to remember where it is, to orient itself in this wooden universe that tilts and rolls beneath you. The hammock cradles you in a way that feels almost protective now, though you remember how strange it seemed those first nights, how your body fought against the gentle swing, how you reached out in half-sleep expecting to find solid ground and found only air. Now the motion is part of sleep itself, inseparable from rest, and on those rare occasions when the ship lies becalmed and still, you find yourself wakeful, disturbed by the absence of movement as others are disturbed by its presence. You have learned the geography of cold in this space. There are territories of lesser chill, the area near the galley stovepipe where the iron passes through on its way to the deck above, the corner where bodies cluster most densely and shared warmth accumulates like a small fortune. There are regions of bitter cold, near the hull where the sea presses its infinite ice against oak planks, beneath the hatchway where drafts descend like invisible waterfalls, along the deck where condensation freezes into patterns that look like ferns or feathers in the lantern light. Your body has mapped these territories without conscious thought, the way a blind man learns the rooms of his house. You know which hammock positions offer relative warmth and which expose you to the worst of the cold. You know which hours of the night are coldest, not the early evening when the residual heat of human activity still lingers, but the deep watches before dawn when the ship seems to shed whatever warmth it held, when frost creeps across every surface and your breath hangs visible even in total darkness. The old sailmaker, whose hammock swings 3 feet from yours, once told you that a ship is never truly at rest, that even in calm seas it breathes and settles, that wood remembers the forest and yearns always toward the earth. You didn't understand then, but you do now, lying in the dark and feeling the subtle movements that never cease, the creak of timbers adjusting to the weight of water, the whisper of rigging against masts, the soft percussion of waves against the hull that sounds sometimes like conversation in a distant room. Sleep at sea is not the sleep of land. It comes in layers, in levels of consciousness that blend and separate like oil and water. There is the sleep of exhaustion, heavy as stone, that takes you down into darkness so complete you wake with no sense of time having passed. There is the lighter sleep of the experienced sailor, the rest that keeps one part of the mind aware, listening always for the change in wind or wave that signals danger, for the pipe that calls all hands, for the bell that marks the watch's passing. You have learned to sleep through sounds that would have startled you awake in your first weeks aboard, the crash of waves against the bow in heavy weather, the groan of the ship working in a seaway, the thunder of feet on the deck above as the watch changes or adjusts sail. But you wake instantly at sounds that don't belong, a rope parting, a shift in the wind's voice, a quality of silence that suggests something wrong. The men around you have become familiar in ways both intimate and strange. You know the sound of each man's breathing, can identify who coughs or snores or mutters in sleep. You know which men sleep quietly and which thrash in their hammocks, fighting dreams you'll never know. You know the smell of each man's sweat, the particular odor of his clothes and skin, can distinguish them in darkness by scent alone. There is Collins, the cooper, who sleeps as still as death, barely moving through the entire watch below, his breathing so quiet you've checked more than once to ensure he still lived. There is young James, the apprentice, who cries out sometimes in his sleep, calling for his mother in a voice that makes the older men turn away in the darkness, remembering their own first voyages, their own early fears. There is Henderson, the boatswain's mate, who snores with a rhythm that seems to match the ship's rolling, a sound that has become oddly comforting in its reliability. There is the Portuguese sailor whose name you've never learned to pronounce correctly, who prays in whispers before sleep, words in a language you don't understand but recognize as petitions for safety, for morning, for home. The hammocks hang so close that you can reach out in darkness and touch the canvas of the next one over, feel the weight and warmth of the man sleeping there. This proximity, which seemed unbearable at first, has become simply the condition of life at sea. Privacy is a luxury that doesn't exist below decks, an idea from another world, and you've learned to create internal privacy, spaces in your mind where you can be alone even surrounded by others. You've learned which thoughts to think and which to avoid in the hours before sleep. There are memories that help: the warmth of summer sun on stone walls, the smell of bread baking, the weight of a wool blanket that doesn't smell of salt and mildew. There are memories that hurt: faces of people you may not see again, voices you're forgetting despite your efforts to hold them, the taste of foods that seem impossibly distant now, luxuries of a world that floats somewhere beyond the horizon. The veterans have taught you the small strategies of survival that make life bearable. How to create a pillow from spare clothing rolled and wrapped in sailcloth, positioned just so to support your head without falling through the hammock's netting. How to sleep on your side with one arm threaded through the hammock's edge to keep from rolling out in heavy weather. How to wrap your blanket around yourself in a way that traps warmth and keeps out drafts, a technique that looks simple but requires practice to master. They've taught you about layering, about keeping your dry clothes between your body and the wet ones, using your own warmth to slowly dry them while you sleep. They've taught you never to sleep in wet clothes if you can possibly avoid it, that the temporary comfort isn't worth the deep cold that sets in, the way dampness pulls heat from your body like a thief. You've learned to check your hammock before climbing in, to run your hands along the canvas searching for dampness, for the small tears that can widen in the night and spill you onto the deck below. You've learned to check the hooks and lashings, to never trust that they'll hold just because they held the night before. You've seen men fall when their hammocks gave way, watched them crash down into the narrow space between sleeping bodies, cursing and bruised but usually unbroken. The fall is short, and there are other hammocks below to break it. The darkness below decks is nearly absolute when the hatches are battened in rough weather. The few lanterns allowed burn with flames turned low to conserve oil, and their light barely penetrates the gloom, creates more shadows than illumination. In this darkness, the other senses sharpen. You learn to navigate by touch and sound, by the feel of the deck beneath your feet and the voice of the ship around you. You've learned the discipline of the watch system, how life divides into 4-hour segments, how sleep comes in fragments rather than long continuous stretches. The first time you experienced this, it seemed impossible that a body could function on such interrupted rest. You would wake to the call for your watch feeling as if you'd barely closed your eyes, dragging yourself from the hammock into the cold with limbs that felt filled with sand. But the body adapts. You've discovered that you can fall asleep within minutes of lying down, can drop into rest so quickly it seems like falling. You've learned to wake fully alert when called, to rise and move immediately even when everything in you wants to remain cocooned in whatever small warmth you've accumulated. The body learns what the mind cannot quite accept, that this is simply how life works at sea, that resistance is useless, that acceptance brings a kind of peace. The cold is worst in the early morning watch, the hours between midnight and 4 when the ship's heat has long since dissipated and the new day's sun is still far below the horizon. You wake to frost inside the cabin, ice forming on the water in the barrels, your breath creating clouds that hang in the still air. The metal fittings are painful to touch, burn like fire against skin, and you've learned to wrap cloth around your hands before grasping anything iron or brass. In these hours, the temptation to remain in the hammock is almost overwhelming. The thin cocoon of blankets holds whatever warmth your body has generated, and the air outside promises immediate, piercing cold. But duty drives you out, and the knowledge that your watchmates are depending on you, and the deeper knowledge that a ship doesn't run on comfort but on discipline and collective will. You've learned to dress while still in the hammock, a complicated dance of pulling on clothes in a confined space, threading arms and legs through garments while maintaining balance. The canvas rocks gently as you move, and you've developed a rhythm to it, a sequence of movements that minimizes the time you're exposed to the cold. Shirt first, then jacket, then the wool cap that covers your ears and traps heat around your head. The deck above comes alive with sound as the watch changes, feet moving across planking, voices calling orders, the creak of ropes through blocks as sails are adjusted. These sounds filter down through the hatches and the gaps in the deck, mixing with the constant voice of the sea, the wind, the working of the ship's timber. It becomes a kind of music, repetitive but never quite the same, a symphony of labor and survival. You drop from the hammock into the cold, feet finding the deck with practiced certainty even in darkness. Around you, other men are moving, shapes in shadow, and the air fills with the sounds of mourning, coughing, the scrape of boots, the rustle of clothing, muttered greetings or complaints in voices still rough with sleep. The companionway leads up toward the deck, a vertical tunnel of deeper darkness that opens onto the night sky. You climb toward it, hands finding the ladder rungs automatically, and emerge into cold that makes the below-deck air seem warm by comparison. The wind hits you immediately, carrying spray and the smell of open ocean, and you're fully awake now, whatever sleep remained burned away by the shock of exposure. The deck stretches away in both directions, a wilderness of shadow and pale wood under a sky that holds more stars than you knew existed. The sails overhead are dark shapes against that starfield, and the rigging creates a web of lines that seem to map constellations. The sea is a moving darkness all around, barely visible but profoundly present, and the ship moves through it with a determination that feels almost alive. Your watch gathers at the appointed place, men emerging from below one by one, stamping feet and blowing on hands, pulling jackets tighter. The officer of the watch assigns tasks, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air, and you move to your station, hands finding familiar ropes, body falling into the rhythm of work that has become second nature. The work warms you gradually, circulation returning to hands and feet, breath coming easier as muscles engage. There is a satisfaction in this, in the way the body responds to labor, in the immediate feedback of physical work. You pull on lines and feel the sail respond overhead, watch it fill and draw, see the ship's response in the way it settles and accelerates through the water. The hours pass in a blur of small tasks and long periods of watchful waiting. You stand your turn at lookout, eyes scanning the horizon for lights or land or weather, seeing nothing but the vast expanse of ocean and sky. You help adjust trim as the wind shifts, pulling or easing lines on command, coordinating with other men in the dark through long practice and mutual understanding. When your watch ends, you descend back into the cabin with relief. The space below seems warmer now, heated by the bodies of sleeping men, and you strip off your wet outer layers and hang them where they might dry, knowing they probably won't. Back into the hammock, which has grown cold in your absence, pulling the blankets around you, and sleep comes almost immediately, dropping over you like a curtain. This is the pattern, repeated day after day, watch after watch, until the divisions between them blur and time becomes something measured not in days but in cycles of sleep and waking, labor and rest. The cold remains constant, a baseline condition of existence, something you're never entirely free from but learn to accommodate, to work around, to endure. You've seen men broken by this life, by the cold and the cramped quarters and the interrupted sleep. They become hollow, moving through their duties with eyes that look inward at something damaged and diminishing. The officers watch for this, know the signs, and sometimes such men are given easier duties or, if the ship calls at port, left behind to recover or to make their way home. But you've also seen men transformed, boys who came aboard soft and uncertain growing lean and capable, developing a competence that shows in the way they move, the way they handle line and sail, the way they read weather and sea. The harsh conditions forge something, burning away whatever is unnecessary and leaving behind only what's essential. The old sailors say that the sea sorts men, that it reveals who you are in ways that land never could. In the comfort of shore life, weakness can be hidden, compensated for, but at sea everything is exposed. Your courage or lack of it, your willingness to endure, your capacity to function when exhausted and cold and far from anything that feels like safety, these things become visible to everyone, including yourself. You've learned about your own capacity for endurance, discovered reserves you didn't know existed. The first weeks at sea, you doubted you would survive, doubted that anyone could live like this for months on end. But here you are, surviving, your body adapted and adapting, your mind finding ways to preserve itself even in conditions that seemed unendurable. The community below decks is complex, governed by unwritten rules that you've learned by observation and occasional mistake. There are hierarchies of experience, of skill, of strength, but also of character. The men who share their knowledge, who help the younger sailors learn, who maintain good humor in the worst conditions, these men have a status that transcends official rank. There is a generosity that exists here, hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. Men who have almost nothing will share what they have, a bit of extra food carefully saved, a dry pair of socks, a warmer corner of the cabin. This isn't sentimentality but something more pragmatic, a recognition that survival depends on collective welfare, that today's help to another might be tomorrow's help to yourself. You've learned the art of the sea story, the long narratives that fill the hours between watches when sleep won't come or when the ship is becalmed and there's nothing to do but wait for wind. The old sailors are repositories of experience, carrying stories of storms and calms, of ports visited and ships lost, of encounters with other vessels and creatures of the deep. These stories serve multiple purposes. They educate, teaching through narrative the lessons that might otherwise be learned through deadly experience. They entertain, providing escape from the monotony and hardship. They bind, creating a shared culture, a common language of reference and memory that makes the crew something more than just individuals who happen to occupy the same space. You've contributed your own small stories now, experiences accumulated over weeks and months, and you felt the satisfaction of holding the attention of tired men, of seeing them lean in to hear what happened next, of earning your place in the tradition of storytelling that stretches back as far as ships have sailed. The sleeping cabin becomes a world unto itself during the long passages between ports, a small civilization with its own customs and conflicts, its own heroes and outcasts. Disputes arise over small things, space, smell, snoring, the division of limited resources, but they're usually resolved quickly because everyone understands that sustained conflict in such close quarters becomes unbearable for all. You've learned to let small irritations pass, to cultivate patience with habits that would drive you mad if you gave them full attention. The man who clears his throat constantly, the one who always takes slightly more than his share, the one who complains endlessly, you've learned to hear these things without letting them penetrate, to maintain an internal equilibrium that isn't dependent on perfect conditions. The ship itself becomes a kind of parent, providing shelter despite all discomforts, carrying you across distances you couldn't possibly traverse otherwise, standing between you and the annihilating power of the ocean. You've developed a relationship with the vessel, know its sounds and movements, can sense when something is wrong by subtle changes in vibration or noise. This connection isn't mystical but practical, born of constant proximity and dependence. You know which timbers creak in certain seas, which stays sing in specific winds, which areas of deck are solid and which slightly soft with rot that hasn't yet become dangerous. This knowledge accumulates without conscious effort, simply through living aboard, through paying the kind of attention that survival requires. The nights when the cold is most intense, when frost grows thick on every surface and your breath freezes in your beard, you lie in the hammock and think about warmth as an abstract concept, something that exists in theory but that you can barely remember in physical terms. The warmth of a fireplace seems like something from a story, impossibly luxurious. The warmth of summer sun feels like a myth, something you've heard about but never actually experienced. Yet you know you have experienced these things, that warmth exists, that seasons change, that this cold is temporary even if it feels permanent. This knowledge sustains you, not the warmth itself, but the certainty that warmth exists somewhere, that this voyage will end, that there will be shore and shelter and the opportunity to be truly warm again. The stars above when you emerge for your watch have become familiar, their patterns memorized not from books but from countless hours of observation. You know which stars rise when, which constellations arc across the sky at different seasons. You've learned to navigate by them, to find direction and position, to read in their positions stories of latitude and time. This knowledge connects you to every sailor who has ever looked up at the same stars, who has found in their fixed patterns a reliability that the earth and sea don't offer. The stars don't change, don't shift with wind or current, and in a life defined by motion and uncertainty, their constancy is profoundly comforting. You wake in the night, though wake is not the right word, because you were never fully asleep, and the darkness around you is absolute. The cold has settled into your bones with the patient thoroughness of winter itself, and for a moment you cannot remember where the boundary lies between your own body and the wooden bunk beneath you. Your hands, tucked beneath your arms, have gone numb despite the wool coat you wear even now, even here in this narrow berth where you lie listening to the ship's constant song of protest and endurance. The hammock to your left sways with the roll of the hull, and you hear Jenkins breathing in that shallow, careful way that tells you he too is awake, conserving warmth, counting the hours until the next watch begins. No one speaks. Speaking would require opening your mouth, letting the cold air touch your tongue, your teeth, the soft warmth inside that you guard now as jealously as you once guarded coins or letters from home. You have learned to communicate in other ways down here, the shift of weight in a hammock, the creak of rope, the particular quality of someone's breathing that says I am here, I am still here, I endure. The lantern that hung from the beam went out hours ago, the oil spent, and no one has moved to relight it. Light requires movement, and movement requires exposing yourself to the full measure of the cold that waits just beyond the thin cocoon of blankets and clothing you have wrapped around yourself. Better to lie still. Better to let your mind drift through the darkness, touching on memories of warmth the way your tongue might touch a sore tooth, testing the edges of something that once was whole. You think of the galley, where earlier in the evening you stood as close to the stove as you dared, feeling the heat push back against your chest and face while your back remained locked in cold. You had held your tin cup of coffee in both hands, not drinking yet, just letting the warmth seep through the metal into your palms. The cook had been frying salt pork in a pan, and the smell filled that cramped space with something that felt almost like home, almost like comfort, though the meat itself was tough and the fat congealed quickly on your plate once you carried it away from the stove's immediate orbit. Thompson had been there too, standing close enough that your shoulders nearly touched, both of you angled toward the heat like flowers toward sun. He had not said much, Thompson never did, especially now, weeks into this voyage with the cold settling over everything like a second sea, but his presence had been companionable, solid, the kind of quiet fellowship that asks for nothing and gives what little warmth can be shared simply by standing near. You had eaten slowly, making the meal last, drawing out those minutes in the galley's relative warmth before duty called you back to the deck or down here to the FOCSLE where the cold waits with inexhaustible patience. The cook had nodded when you finally handed back your empty plate, his face ruddy from the stove's heat, his eyes showing that he understood what it meant to leave that small circle of warmth and return to the ship's cold embrace. Now, lying in your bunk with the darkness pressed close around you, you can still taste the salt pork, still feel the ghost of that tin cup's warmth in your hands. These sense memories are currency here, small treasures you spend carefully, parsing them out through the long night watches when sleep will not come and the cold makes your thoughts move sluggishly, like oil thickening in winter. The ship rolls through another swell, and you feel the whole structure around you flex and groan. Oak ribs that were shaped in some distant shipyard now speak in voices that have become familiar, that high creak from the beam overhead, the deeper groan from somewhere down in the hull where the keel takes the sea's weight, the particular squeal of the rudder chains running through their blocks. You have learned to read these sounds the way you once read words on a page, understanding what each one means, knowing when the ship is working normally and when something has changed, some new stress or strain that requires attention. Above you, footsteps cross the deck, the watch making their rounds, checking lines, scanning the horizon for lights or land or weather. You imagine them up there in the wind, wrapped in their oilskins, frost forming on their beards, their hands gone clumsy with cold even inside their gloves. In an hour, you will join them. For now, you lie still and try to gather what rest you can, knowing that rest and sleep are not always the same thing, that sometimes rest is simply lying still and letting your body do what little healing it can manage before you ask it once again to move, to work, to endure. Jenkins shifts in his hammock, and you hear the fabric creak, the rope stretch. He has been at sea longer than you, 15 years, he told you once, since he first signed on a merchantman at 14, a boy small enough to climb the rigging even in a gale, nimble enough to edge out along the yards when grown men's weight would have been too much for wind-stressed canvas to bear. He knows all the small tricks of warmth, the ways to conserve heat in these frozen spaces. You have watched him and learned. He taught you to sleep in your clothes, everything layered on, wool trousers, flannel shirt, wool jacket, and over all of it your oilskin coat that keeps the damp out even if it does nothing for the cold. He showed you how to tuck your blanket beneath you, creating a seal that traps your body's warmth instead of letting it bleed away into the wood below. He demonstrated the way to breathe, shallow, through your nose, warming the air slightly before it reaches your lungs, and how to position your hands so they stay as warm as possible without cutting off circulation. These are the lessons that do not appear in any sailing manual, the knowledge passed down from sailor to sailor in quiet moments, demonstrated rather than explained. This is how we survive, Jenkins had said, not making it dramatic, not making it into anything more than simple fact. This is what works. You have added your own discoveries to his teachings. You learned that if you clench and release your toes inside your boots, working each foot in small rhythmic movements, you can keep the blood flowing there, can prevent that terrible numbness that makes it dangerous to climb the ratlins when your watch is called. You discovered that pressing your palms against your neck, where the great vessels run close to the surface, can trick your body into thinking it is warmer than it is, at least for a few minutes. And you learned, as everyone learns down here in the FOCSLE, that there is a kind of cold you can fight, the cold that comes from wind and spray and exposure, and another kind you cannot, the cold that settles into the very bones of the ship, into the wood and metal, into the fabric of hammocks and the wool of blankets, a cold so deep and patient that all you can do is endure it, mark its passage, and take what small comfort exists in knowing that others have endured the same and survived. The water sounds different tonight. You cannot say exactly how, but there is something in the rhythm of it against the hull, some quality to the slap and rush, that tells you the weather is changing. Perhaps the wind is shifting, or the swells are building in a new direction. Perhaps a storm is moving toward you across the dark miles of open water, or perhaps one is moving away, leaving calmer seas in its wake. You will know in the morning, or when the watch changes and you climb on deck and can see the sky, read the clouds, feel the wind's direction on your face. For now, there is only the darkness and the cold and the small sphere of warmth you have created around yourself through stillness and patience and the careful management of breath and blanket and body. There is the sound of other men breathing around you, each in his own bunk or hammock, each maintaining his own small vigil against the night. There is the endless motion of the ship, the rise and fall that continues whether you are aware of it or not, that will continue even when you sleep, if you sleep, that will go on after this voyage ends and you step again onto solid ground that does not move beneath your feet. You remember the first nights at sea, years ago now, when the motion made you sick and the darkness frightened you and the cold seemed like a physical enemy, something that wanted to defeat you, to break you, to send you back to land admitting failure. You had lain in your bunk then feeling utterly alone, utterly unprepared, wondering what madness had brought you here to this frozen hell of wood and water. But humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. What seems unbearable on the first night becomes merely difficult by the 10th, uncomfortable by the 20th, and eventually settles into something you simply accept, the baseline condition of your existence. The cold is here. You are here. And between those two facts, you find ways to live, small accommodations and adjustments that make continuation possible. You learn to find comfort in things that would have seemed absurd to your younger self, to the boy who left land with dreams of adventure and exotic ports. You learn to take pleasure in a hot cup of coffee, in a moment standing near the galley stove, in the feel of dry socks, rare and precious, against your feet. You learned that a kind word from a shipmate, a nod of acknowledgement, a hand briefly gripping your shoulder, could warm you in ways that blankets could not. The ship creaks again, and somewhere forward you hear Mitchell coughing, that deep, wet cough that has been with him for days now, that speaks of cold settled into the lungs, moisture that will not clear, inflammation that hot tea and honey can ease but not cure. You have heard coughs like that before. Sometimes they pass when the ship reaches warmer waters or makes port and a man can spend nights in a boarding house bed, can dry out his clothes properly, can eat hot food and sleep in a heated room. Sometimes they do not pass. Sometimes they deepen and spread and become the kind of sickness that puts a man ashore for good, or worse. But Mitchell is young and strong, and the cough has not yet reached that dangerous stage. The carpenter gave him an extra ration of rum yesterday, medicinal, and he has been taking it mixed with hot water before bed. It seems to help, or at least it lets him sleep more soundly, his body forcing rest even when his conscious mind might resist, knowing what rest down here in the cold truly means. You shift slightly, testing your own body, taking inventory. Your shoulders ache from hauling on lines earlier in the watch, that deep muscle soreness that comes from sustained effort in the cold when your body cannot warm itself properly, when it must work without the benefit of heat to loosen stiff tissue and joints. Your hands, even tucked close against your body, throb faintly where the skin has cracked at the knuckles, small fissures that open and close with each movement, that weep clear fluid and sting when salt water touches them. Your feet, though you have been working the exercises Jenkins taught you, feel distant and numb, blocks of something heavy and cold attached to your legs. You can wiggle your toes if you concentrate, can feel them move inside your boots, but the sensation is muted, as if it must travel a great distance to reach your brain. This too is normal. This too is simply the condition of being here, of sleeping in this space where the cold has free access and warmth is only a memory or a hope. The watch bell sounds above, muffled by distance and wood but still audible, for bells, 2 in the morning, the dead hours when the body wants most desperately to sleep and when staying alert requires an effort of will that can feel almost impossible. You are not on watch now. Your time will come at 4 bells of the morning watch, still hours away, and you try to let yourself sink back toward whatever rest you can find, knowing that those hours will pass whether you spend them in fitful half-sleep or in this wakeful state of suspension, hovering between consciousness and true rest. You think of the men on deck now, standing their watch in the wind and cold. You think of the helmsman, hands on the wheel, feeling through the wood the ship's response to rudder and sea, making the constant small corrections that keep the vessel on course. You think of the lookout posted forward, scanning the darkness for any change in the rhythm of the waves, any light or shape that might mean danger or land or another ship crossing your path. These are your brothers in this endeavor, though you might not use such a word, though the relationships here are marked more by silence than speech, by shared endurance rather than shared confidences. You trust them in ways that go deeper than friendship, trust them to stand their watches properly, to wake you when your turn comes, to handle the ship with the competence that keeps everyone alive. And they trust you the same way, not because you have spoken oaths or made promises, but because you are here, doing your part, maintaining your station in the complex organism of crew and ship that moves as one entity across the face of the sea. A rat scratches somewhere in the darkness, down in the bilge or between the walls, one of the many small creatures that share this floating world. You have grown accustomed to them, to the sounds they make, the way they emerge at night to forage for any scrap of food that might have fallen or been left carelessly accessible. They are passengers like you, seeking warmth and shelter and sustenance, making their own accommodation with the cold and the motion and the endless creaking song of the ship's structure. The cold presses closer now, or perhaps your small sphere of warmth has diminished, the heat your body generates no longer quite sufficient to maintain the fragile envelope that keeps the worst of it at bay. You pull your blanket tighter, tuck your chin down against your chest, draw your knees up slightly, making yourself smaller, reducing the surface area exposed to the frigid air. These are instinctive movements, the body's ancient responses to cold, strategies that worked for your ancestors huddled in caves or rough shelters and that work still, here in this wooden cave that moves across the water. You wonder, as you often do on these long nights, what drove men to sea in the first place, what combination of necessity and ambition and restlessness sends generation after generation out onto the water, into these conditions, away from the warmth and safety and comfort of land. The reasons are probably as varied as the men themselves: economic need, legal trouble, family conflict, simple curiosity, or that less definable thing that some call wanderlust, the desire to see what lies beyond the horizon, to test yourself against the world's indifference. Your own reasons seem distant now, softened by time and cold and the daily reality of life aboard. You remember thinking that the sea would make you free, would offer adventures that the land could not match, would turn you into someone stronger, more capable, more alive. And perhaps it has done all those things, though not in the ways you imagined. The sea has taught you about limits, your own and the world's. It has taught you what the body can endure and what it cannot, where the line falls between perseverance and foolhardiness, how to read the signs that tell you when to push harder and when to simply hold on and survive. It has taught you, too, about the small satisfactions, the modest pleasures that become magnified when everything else is stripped away. The taste of hot food after hours of cold. The sight of land after weeks of empty horizon. The feeling of dry clothes against clean skin. The sound of laughter in the focsle when someone tells a story well enough to make men forget for a moment where they are and what they are enduring. These things would have seemed trivial to you once, barely worth noticing. Now they are everything, the markers by which you measure your days, the rewards that make the hardship bearable. You have learned to want less, and in wanting less, to appreciate more fully what little you have. Jenkins shifts again, and this time he speaks, his voice barely above a whisper, rough with cold and sleep. You awake? Yes, you answer, your own voice feeling strange in your throat, the first words you have spoken in hours. Can't sleep neither, he says. Cold gets into your head, makes your thoughts run in circles. You make a sound of agreement, not quite a word, just an acknowledgement that you understand, that you share this experience. Used to bother me more, Jenkins continues, still speaking softly, mindful of the other men sleeping around you. The cold, the dark, all of it. But after a while, you stop fighting it. Just let it be what it is. How long did it take, you ask, to stop fighting? He is quiet for a moment, considering. Years, maybe. Or maybe it happens all at once without you noticing. One night you realize you're not angry about it anymore. You're just, here. Living through it. Same as you live through anything else. His words settle into the darkness between you, and you think about them, turn them over in your mind. There is wisdom in what he says, the kind of wisdom that only comes from long experience, from surviving many winters at sea, many cold watches, many nights like this one. The worst is thinking about warmth too much, Jenkins says. Remembering your mother's kitchen, or a girl you knew, or sitting by a fire in an inn. You start thinking about those things, and it makes this, he gestures, though you cannot see the movement in the dark, harder to bear. Better to stay in the moment. Feel the cold, accept it, and then let your mind go quiet. You nod, though he cannot see it, then realize he is probably not looking for a visible response anyway. This is just Jenkins sharing what he knows, passing along the accumulated knowledge of his years at sea, the techniques that have kept him sane and functional through countless voyages. What do you think about, you ask, when you let your mind go quiet? Nothing, mostly, he says. Or maybe not nothing, just small things. The sound of the water. The way the ship moves. Sometimes I count breaths. Sometimes I just listen to all the sounds around me until they become like one big sound, like the whole ship is breathing together. Puts me to sleep eventually. Or something close to sleep. You try it now, letting your awareness expand to take in all the sounds at once, the creaking wood, the water against the hull, the breathing of the other men, the wind outside, the distant bell marking the watches. At first, the sounds remain distinct, separate elements that your mind catalogs and categorizes. But gradually, as you stop trying to identify each one, as you simply let them exist together, they do begin to blend, to become a kind of symphony, rhythmic and endless, the voice of the ship itself speaking in its complex language of stress and flex and movement. Your breathing slows, matching itself to some rhythm in the sounds around you, and you feel your body begin to release some of the tension it has been holding, the constant low-level vigilance that keeps you partly alert even when you want to rest. This is not quite sleep, but it is close, a state of deep relaxation where time seems to slow and the cold recedes to something distant and abstract, still present but no longer demanding your full attention. How long you float in this state, you cannot say. Time moves differently here, in the darkness, without any reference point beyond the distant bells that mark the watches. You exist in a kind of suspension, not fully asleep but no longer actively awake, your consciousness drifting like the ship itself drifts on the current, following paths determined by forces larger than yourself. When you surface again into fuller awareness, the quality of the darkness has changed slightly. Not lighter, dawn is still far off, but somehow less absolute, as if your eyes have adjusted as much as they ever will, finding shapes and gradations in what first appeared as complete blackness. You can make out the beam overhead now, a slightly darker line against dark air. You can see the curve of Jenkins' hammock, the bulk of other sleeping forms around you. The cold is still here, unchanged, patient as always. Your body has adjusted to it as much as it will, has drawn what warmth it can from blankets and clothing and its own internal furnace, now burning low but still alight. You know that when you move, when you must rise for the next watch, the cold will seem worse again, as your blood begins to circulate more freely and carry sensation back to numbed extremities. But for now, lying still, you have reached a kind of equilibrium with it, an uneasy truce that allows for rest if not comfort. You think of the morning that will come, eventually, inevitably. The bell will sound for the watch change. You will rise, stiff and cold, and climb the narrow ladder to the deck. The sky will be growing light in the east, gray at first, then perhaps touched with color if the weather allows. You will take your station, do your work, move your body until blood flows properly again and the deep ache in your muscles eases into something more manageable. There will be breakfast eventually, hot porridge if the weather permits the galley fires to stay lit, or cold biscuit and salt pork if it does not. There will be coffee, bitter and strong, that you will drink gratefully regardless of its quality. There will be the day's work, whatever it requires, hauling on lines, scrubbing decks, maintaining rigging, standing watch, the endless tasks that keep a ship functioning and moving toward its destination. And there will be another night after that, and another cold FOCSLE waiting for you when your watch is done, another round of careful preparation for sleep, another negotiation with the cold and the dark and your own body's limits. This is the rhythm of your life now, simple and repetitive, marked by watches and meals and the slow progress of the ship across the water toward whatever port lies ahead. But between now and then, there is still this moment, this quiet hour in the darkness where nothing is required of you except to lie still and rest. There is still the small warmth of your blankets, the solid wood beneath you, the presence of other men around you engaged in the same struggle, the same survival. There is still the ship itself, holding together against the sea, carrying you all forward through the night. You close your eyes again, or perhaps they were already closed, it makes little difference in this darkness, and let yourself drift back toward that half-sleeping state, that place where time and cold and discomfort recede into a kind of background hum that you notice but do not fight. Jenkins has grown quiet in his hammock, his breathing slower and deeper, and you hope he has found real sleep at last, that his body is taking what rest it can before the bell calls him back to duty. The ship rolls through another swell, and you move with it now without thinking, your body having learned the rhythm so thoroughly that balance requires no conscious thought. This too is a kind of adaptation, one of the many small ways you have changed to fit this life, become someone who can sleep in motion, who can rest in cold, who can endure what once would have seemed unendurable. And somewhere in this thought, in this recognition of how far you have come from the person who first signed onto a ship, from the boy who thought the sea would be adventure and romance and freedom, somewhere in this space between who you were and who you have become, you find something that might be acceptance, might be peace, might simply be exhaustion so complete that it feels like wisdom. The cold remains. The darkness remains. The endless motion of the ship through water remains. But you remain too, still here, still breathing, still holding your small piece of warmth in this frozen world. And for now, for this moment, that is enough. You wake in darkness to the sound of someone retching into the bucket near the bulkhead, and though the sound is miserable you feel nothing but kinship with whoever it is, because you have been that person too, heaving up what little your stomach held while the cold bit into your skin and the ship pitched beneath you. The air in the forecastle carries the sharp tang of illness mixed with the perpetual damp, and you lie still for a moment, letting your body adjust to wakefulness, feeling the familiar ache in your shoulders and hips where they have pressed against the hard surface of your berth all through the night. The wool of your blanket is damp against your chin, condensation from your own breath having settled into the fibers during the hours of sleep, and you pull it closer anyway because it is all you have between yourself and the cold that seeps through every plank and rivet of this wooden world. Around you the other men are stirring, or not stirring, each in his own relationship with consciousness and rest. Some have learned to sleep through almost anything, their bodies having surrendered to exhaustion so complete that even the crash of a wave against the bow or the sudden lurch of the deck cannot pull them from whatever depths they have found. Others lie awake as you do, eyes open or closed, simply enduring the hours until the call comes to rise and begin again. You have come to recognize the different qualities of stillness in this space, the way a sleeping man breathes versus the way a wakeful man holds himself quiet, and you know without looking that at least 3 others are awake right now, somewhere in this crowded dark, thinking their own thoughts or thinking nothing at all. The ship moves beneath you with what feels like a gentler motion than yesterday, the long rolling swells that suggest open water and steady wind rather than the chaotic chop of conflicting currents. You have learned to read the ship's movement the way you once read the sky above your village, interpreting each shift and tilt as information about the world beyond these wooden walls. The creaking is constant but not urgent, the timbers flexing and settling in their ancient conversation with the sea, and you listen to this language that has become so familiar, finding in it a kind of comfort despite everything else. Your hands are stiff when you try to flex your fingers, the joints reluctant to bend, and you work them slowly under the blanket, rubbing one palm against the other to coax warmth and movement back into them. The cold has a way of settling into your extremities during sleep, pooling in your fingers and toes until they feel like things that belong to someone else, and it takes time each morning to reclaim them as your own. You think of the sailmaker who lost 3 fingers to frostbite on a winter crossing, how he showed you the stumps with neither pride nor shame, simply stating the fact of what the cold could do if you let it. You have been careful since then, more vigilant about keeping your hands and feet moving when you can, never letting them grow entirely numb even when exhaustion tempts you to simply stop caring. Someone strikes a light near the forward bulkhead and the small flame dances in its protective housing, casting long shadows that stretch and contract with the ship's motion. By that small light you can see the familiar shapes of your companions, lumps in their berths or sitting hunched on the edges of their sleeping spaces, breath visible in the frigid air. A few men are already pulling on their outer garments, preparing for whatever work the day will demand, their movements slow and deliberate in the cold. You watch the flame for a moment, mesmerized by its tiny warmth, and you remember how precious fire is in this environment, how carefully it must be managed and how quickly it could turn from blessing to catastrophe if given the chance. The man who had been sick earlier sits up now, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, and someone passes him a dipper of water without comment. He drinks carefully, then hands the dipper back and lies down again, pulling his blanket up over his head. No one asks if he is all right because the answer is evident and because asking would serve no purpose except to embarrass him. You have all been sick, all been weak, all been reduced to something less than what you imagined yourselves to be when you signed on or were pressed into service. The sea does not care about your dignity, and neither, in the end, do your shipmates, not because they are cruel but because dignity is a luxury none of you can afford to maintain or require of others. You sit up slowly, letting your blanket fall away, and the cold hits you like a physical force, making you gasp despite your intention to move calmly and quietly. The air feels almost solid, pressing against your chest and face, and you reach for your outer shirt where it hangs from a peg driven into the beam above your berth. The fabric is stiff with salt and damp, and pulling it on requires effort, your arms having to force their way through sleeves that have shrunk and hardened overnight. But once it is on your body, heat begins to warm it slightly, and you layer your jacket over it, then wrap your scarf around your neck and lower face, creating the armor of cloth that will allow you to function in the world above. The call comes then, the voice of the mate echoing down through the hatch, and men begin to move with more purpose, some heading directly for the ladder, others stopping to relieve themselves in the heads or to take a drink of water or a bite of whatever food they have saved from the previous day's ration. You are not on watch yet, but you know you will not sleep again, so you join the general movement toward wakefulness, pulling on your boots and lacing them carefully, checking that your knife is still secure at your belt and that your hat is pulled down firmly over your ears. These small rituals of preparation are automatic now, your hands knowing what to do without conscious thought, and you find a kind of meditation in the repetition, in the simple act of making yourself ready for whatever comes next. You climb the ladder to the deck and emerge into a world transformed by dawn light. The sky is pale gray shading to pink along the eastern horizon, and the sea stretches in every direction like hammered pewter, its surface textured by wind but not violent, not angry. The air above deck is bitterly cold but cleaner than the atmosphere below, and you breathe deeply despite the way it sears your lungs, filling yourself with the sharp freshness of it. Ice has formed on the rigging overnight, coating every rope and spar with a glittering shell, and the ship looks like something from a story, beautiful and deadly at once, a creation of frost and wood and human will moving through an indifferent wilderness. Men are already at work despite the early hour, some tending to the sails, others scrubbing at the deck where ice has formed, breaking it free before it can accumulate dangerously. You see the mate standing near the helm, speaking with the captain who has come on deck wrapped in a heavy coat, his breath making clouds in the frozen air. They are looking at something ahead, and you follow their gaze to see what might be land in the far distance, a darker line against the pale sky that could be coastline or could be cloud or could be nothing but wishful perception. You are assigned to work on the foredeck, helping to clear ice from the anchor chains and inspect the bowsprit for damage. The work is hard and cold, requiring you to expose your hands repeatedly as you chip away ice and test the security of fittings, and within minutes your fingers are numb again despite your earlier efforts to warm them. But you work steadily, methodically, because this is what is required and because keeping the ship safe is keeping yourself safe, and because there is something almost satisfying about the simple clarity of the task, the way each piece of ice you break free represents a small victory against the elements that seek constantly to overwhelm you. Your companion on this work is a man from somewhere in the north, older than you, with a face weathered by decades of this life. He works without speaking, his movements efficient and practiced, and you match your rhythm to his, finding that you can accomplish more by working in silent coordination than by trying to direct or discuss each action. When your hands become too numb to grip the tools effectively, you both stop and thrust your fingers under your arms, warming them against your body while stomping your feet to restore circulation. He looks at you then and nods, not smiling but acknowledging your presence and your effort, and you nod back, and this small exchange feels more meaningful than any conversation you might have had. By the time the sun has fully risen, the immediate work is complete and you are released to break your fast. You return below to find that someone has brought up the morning's ration, and you take your portion of biscuit and salt pork, along with a mug of something hot that might be tea or might be simply hot water with a memory of tea leaves somewhere in its past. But it is hot and that is what matters, and you wrap your hands around the mug and feel the warmth seep into your palms before you risk drinking it. The liquid scalds your mouth but you welcome the sensation, the way it seems to thaw something deep inside your chest, spreading warmth through your core even though you know the effect is temporary and small. You eat slowly, making the food last, and around you other men are doing the same, some sitting in their berths, others gathered in small groups near the stove that provides minimal heat to this space. Conversation is quiet and sparse, voices kept low not from any rule but from a shared understanding that loud talk requires energy none of you wish to spend unnecessarily. Someone is repairing a torn shirt, needle flashing in the dim light, and someone else is attempting to dry a pair of stockings by holding them near the stove, and these small acts of maintenance and self-care continue constantly, each man trying to preserve what little he has against the wear and damage that is inevitable in this environment. You think about the boy you were when you first came to sea, how impossibly distant that person seems now. You remember believing that you were embarking on an adventure, that the hardship would be temporary and romantic, something to tell stories about in your old age. You remember imagining yourself as a figure of daring and capability, someone who would master this environment and emerge transformed by it into something greater. And you suppose you have been transformed, though not in the ways you imagined. The sea has stripped away illusions more than it has added capabilities, has taught you more about limits than about transcendence, has shown you that survival is often more a matter of endurance than heroism. But there is something else too, something harder to name or explain. There is a knowledge you carry now that you did not have before, understanding of what the human body and spirit can withstand, of how much can be borne when bearing it is the only option available. You know the strange intimacy that develops between men who share extreme conditions, the way vulnerability becomes ordinary when everyone is equally exposed, the way help is given and received without ceremony, because to make ceremony of it would be to suggest that needing help is unusual or shameful. You know the particular quality of exhaustion that goes beyond tiredness into something almost peaceful, a state where striving ceases because you have nothing left to strive with, and yet somehow you continue to function, your body carrying on while your mind observes from a distance. You know the beauty that exists even in harsh places, the way ice can glitter like diamonds in the morning light, the way a sunset can paint the sky in colors so intense they seem impossible, the way the stars on a clear night at sea are more numerous and brilliant than stars seen from land, as though the darkness of the ocean allows them to burn more fiercely. You know the sound of wind in rigging, the creak of timbers, the slap of waves against hull, and you know these sounds so deeply that you hear them in your dreams and probably will hear them for the rest of your life, whether you ever go to sea again or not. The day progresses in its routine way, watch following watch, work following work, and you perform your assigned tasks with the competence born of repetition. You haul on ropes when hauling is needed, you scrub and chip and splice and carry, you stand your watch scanning the horizon for hazards or changes in weather, you respond to commands with the automatic obedience that keeps a ship functioning efficiently. And through it all the cold remains, sometimes more intense and sometimes less, but never entirely absent, a presence as constant as the deck beneath your feet or the sky above your head. In the afternoon the wind picks up and the temperature drops further, and ice begins to form more aggressively on every surface exposed to spray. The mate orders everyone not actively on essential duty to come below, recognizing that the risk of frostbite or hypothermia is increasing and that preserving the crew's health is more important now than any but the most critical tasks. You return to the forecastle gratefully, though the space is hardly warm, it is at least sheltered from the wind, and you huddle with the others in the limited warmth that collective body heat provides. Someone begins to tell a story, speaking slowly and quietly, about a ship he once served on that became locked in ice for an entire winter, how the crew survived by hunting seals and burning every piece of non-essential wood they could spare, how some men went mad from the confinement and the darkness and how others found a kind of peace in it, accepting their situation and living day by day without torment or fear. You listen to this story without knowing whether it is true or embellished or entirely invented, and you realize that it does not matter, that the truth of it lies not in its factual accuracy but in what it offers to the men listening, which is a framework for understanding their own experience, a suggestion that others have endured similar trials and survived, that survival is possible even when it seems impossible. When the story ends, no one immediately begins another, and you sit in the silence together, each man alone with his thoughts yet connected by proximity and shared circumstance. You find yourself thinking about home again, but differently than before. You no longer imagine it as a place of pure comfort and ease, no longer contrast it absolutely with the hardship of this life at sea. Instead you remember it more truthfully, recall the poverty and hunger that sent you to sea in the first place, remember the cold winters in your family's cottage when fuel was scarce and frost formed on the inside of the windows, remember the uncertainty and fear that were part of life on land just as they are part of life on water. And you realize that what you miss is not the absence of hardship but the presence of particular people, the faces and voices of those who knew you before this life began, who carry memories of you as a child and a youth, who represent continuity and identity in ways that your shipmates, for all the intimacy of shared suffering, cannot. You miss your mother's hands and your father's rare smile, you miss the sound of your sister's laughter and the warmth of the hearth when the whole family gathered around it on winter evenings. You miss being known not as a sailor or a worker but as yourself, as a person with a history and a name that meant something beyond your utility. But you also know that you are not the same person who left that cottage and that village, that even if you return you will carry this experience with you always, that something fundamental has shifted in how you understand yourself and the world. You have learned that you are both more fragile and more resilient than you knew, that the line between living and dying is thinner than you imagined and yet more flexible, that you can endure extremes that once would have seemed unendurable. You have learned that comfort is relative and that gratitude can be found in the smallest improvements to difficult circumstances, that an extra blanket or a hot drink or a moment of shelter from the wind can feel like profound luxury when everything else is stripped away. The light fading through the hatch tells you that evening is approaching, and soon the call will come for the night watch to take their positions. You are not on watch tonight, and you are grateful for it, grateful for the prospect of several hours in which you will not be required to perform any task except to rest and maintain your body's core temperature. You begin the familiar ritual of preparing for sleep, arranging your blanket and clothing to provide maximum insulation, positioning yourself in your berth so that no part of your body presses directly against the cold wood of the hull. Around you others are doing the same, and the forecastle fills with the small sounds of men settling for the night, the rustle of fabric and the creak of berths taking weight and the soft murmur of last conversations before sleep. Someone begins to snore almost immediately, that deep rattling sound that once would have irritated you but that now simply becomes part of the texture of the night, no more remarkable than the sound of waves or wind. You close your eyes and focus on breathing slowly and deeply, on relaxing each part of your body systematically, on sinking into whatever rest you can find. Sleep comes gradually, in layers, and you drift through states of consciousness that blur into one another, sometimes aware of your surroundings and sometimes lost in fragments of dreams that dissolve as soon as you reach for them. You are cold but not unbearably so, uncomfortable but accustomed to discomfort, and somewhere in that state you find a kind of peace, not the peace of contentment but the peace of acceptance, of knowing that this is your reality and that you will endure it because endurance is what you have learned to do. And in the depth of the night, suspended between sleep and waking, you have a thought that surprises you with its clarity. You think that perhaps what you have learned here is not just about surviving hardship but about understanding the nature of human resilience, about recognizing that people have always lived in difficult circumstances and found ways to make those circumstances bearable, have always faced cold and danger and uncertainty and responded with adaptation and cooperation and stubborn persistence. You think about the countless sailors who have slept in freezing cabins before you, who have endured what you are enduring and worse, who have crossed oceans and returned or not returned, who have left few records of their experience but whose collective efforts have connected continents and shaped history. You think about the ways that suffering shared becomes more bearable than suffering endured alone, about how the presence of others who understand what you are going through provides a kind of invisible support that sustains you even when no words are spoken and no direct help is given. You think about how the small acts of kindness and consideration that you witness daily in this space, the passing of a drink or an extra piece of bread, the helping of a weak man to his feet, the patient teaching of a new skill, represent the best of what humans can be, not dramatic heroism but steady decency in the face of ongoing difficulty. And you think that perhaps when you do eventually return to land, if you do return, you will carry this knowledge with you, will remember not just the hardship but the resilience, not just the cold but the warmth that people created for each other within it, not just the fear but the courage that people found or manufactured when courage was required. You think that perhaps this experience, for all its difficulty, has given you something valuable, has taught you something about yourself and about other people that you could not have learned any other way, has shown you depths of strength and vulnerability that exist in every person when circumstances strip away the comfortable facades that normally separate us from each other. The ship moves through the dark water and you move with it, your body rising and falling with the swells, your breath joining the collective breathing of all the men in this space, your warmth mingling with theirs in the cold air. You are one small person in one small ship on a vast ocean, and yet you are connected to something larger than yourself, part of a tradition of human seafaring that stretches back centuries, part of a brotherhood of those who have chosen or been forced to leave the safety of land and venture into the uncertain wilderness of water and wind and weather. You sleep, and wake, and sleep again, and gradually the night passes, and in the morning you will rise and begin another day just like this one, and the day after that will be the same, and the day after that, until finally the voyage ends and you set foot on solid ground once more. But for now you are here, suspended between deck and keel, between sea and sky, between sleep and waking, and you are surviving, you are enduring, you are somehow continuing despite everything, and that continuation feels like its own kind of quiet victory, small and unglamorous but real as the cold against your skin and the wood beneath your body and the breathing of the men who surround you in the darkness. All of you together, all of you making it through another night, all of you. Still here, still alive, still voyaging toward whatever comes next. You wake before dawn on a morning when the sea lies quiet, and for a moment you cannot remember if you slept at all or simply drifted through the hours in that borderland sailors know so well, where consciousness thins but never quite dissolves. The timbers around you creak with the slow rhythm of gentle swells, and the cold presses against your skin like something patient, something that has learned to wait. You do not move immediately. Instead you lie in your hammock, wrapped in your thin blanket and the wool coat you never removed, and you listen to the breathing of the men around you, the small sounds of bodies shifting in sleep, the whisper of rope against wood as someone turns in his rest. The lamp in the passageway beyond the cabin door flickers low, its yellow light barely reaching through the gaps in the planking, but it is enough to suggest the shapes of things, the familiar architecture of this space that has become, through repetition and necessity, a kind of home. You have learned the position of every beam, every hook, every nail. You know which boards groan when stepped upon and which hold silent. You know the smell of damp wool and unwashed bodies, of salt and tar and the faint sweet rot of the bilge far below. These things no longer disturb you. They are simply the conditions of your existence, as fundamental as the need for breath. You swing your legs carefully over the edge of the hammock and lower yourself to the deck, your feet finding the cold planks with practiced ease. Around you, men continue to sleep. Some of them snore softly. Others lie perfectly still, their faces turned toward the hull or buried in the folds of their blankets. You wonder sometimes what they dream about, whether the cold follows them into sleep or whether their minds find warmth in memory, in landscapes far from this wooden world that rolls endlessly across dark water. You make your way quietly through the cabin, stepping around sea chests and coiled rope, past hammocks that hang like cocoons in the dim light. At the base of the companionway ladder, you pause and look back. In the faint glow you can just make out the sleeping forms, the gentle sway of the hammocks, the rise and fall of chests beneath threadbare blankets. There is something almost tender in this scene, something that speaks to the vulnerability all men share when sleep takes them, when the body must trust the ship and the sea and the watch on deck to keep them safe through the hours of darkness. You climb the ladder, your hands finding the worn rungs by touch, and emerge onto the deck where the air is sharp and clean after the close atmosphere below. The sky above is vast and filled with stars so numerous they seem to merge into rivers of light, great arcing currents that flow from horizon to horizon. The moon has set, and in its absence the stars burn with a clarity that almost hurts to see, each one a distant fire impossibly far away, impossibly bright. The officer of the watch stands near the helm, his figure dark against the paler darkness of the sky. He nods to you as you approach, a small acknowledgement between men who have kept these hours together many times before. You do not speak. There is no need. Instead you move to the rail and stand looking out across the water, which is black and smooth as glass, marked only by the faint phosphorescence that trails from the ship's sides, a ghostly luminescence that glows and fades and glows again as tiny organisms in the sea respond to the disturbance of the hull passing through their world. The cold out here is different from the cold below. It moves, it flows, it touches your face and hands with a directness that the still air of the cabin never achieves. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air that tastes of salt and distance, and you feel the tightness in your chest begin to ease. This is the gift the deck offers, this exchange of warmth for space, of shelter for freedom. You have made this trade so many times that it has become ritual, a rhythm as natural as the tides. Behind you, you hear the soft footfalls of another sailor emerging from below. He moves to his station without a word, checking lines, adjusting a block that has worked loose, performing the small tasks that maintain the ship even in the quietest hours. This is the unbroken watch, the continuity that keeps a vessel safe. Someone is always awake, always attending to the wind and the sea and the complex web of rope and canvas that translates one into the other. The sleepers below depend on this vigilance, though most of them have grown so accustomed to it they no longer consciously register the comfort it provides. You remember your first nights at sea, years ago now, when every sound seemed ominous and sleep felt like a dangerous surrender. You would lie rigid in your hammock, listening to the timbers work, convinced that each new groan signaled catastrophe. But gradually, night by night, you learned to distinguish between the ordinary music of a ship underway and the rarer notes that demanded attention. You learned that wood is meant to flex, that hemp stretches and settles, that the sea speaks in many voices and most of them carry no threat. This knowledge came slowly, built from hundreds of watches, thousands of small observations, a patient accumulation of experience that could not be taught in words alone. The officer of the watch moves to the binnacle and checks the compass, its card floating steady in its bowl of oil, illuminated by the small lamp that burns day and night. The course holds true. The wind remains steady from the northwest, filling the sails with a gentle pressure that drives the ship forward at a walking pace, nothing rushed, nothing strained. This is good sailing weather, the kind that allows rest, that permits repairs and maintenance, that gives men time to recover from the harder days that always come eventually. You think about the men sleeping below, each of them carrying his own history, his own reasons for being here in this cold and isolated place. Some of them are here by choice, drawn to the sea by restlessness or curiosity or the promise of wages they could not earn ashore. Others came out of desperation, fleeing debts or failures or lives that had grown unbearable in ways they could not name. A few were pressed into service, given no choice at all, though most of those have either deserted at the first port or settled into the routine with the resignation of men who have learned that resistance only makes suffering worse. But whatever brought them here, whatever dreams or disasters propelled them up the gangway and into the ship's company, they are now bound together by the simple fact of shared survival. They sleep in the same cold cabins, eat the same hard bread and salt meat, stand the same watches under the same sky. They have learned to move through the ship with coordinated grace, each man knowing his role, understanding how his actions affect the others. This knowledge is not always comfortable. There are tensions, resentments, old grievances that surface during long voyages when men live too close together for too long. But beneath these frictions runs a deeper current of mutual dependence, an understanding that here, far from land, every life depends on the competence and attention of every other. The stars will slowly overhead as the earth turns beneath you, that great rotation you cannot feel but can measure by the changing positions of the constellations. You have learned to read these patterns, to find your way by Polaris and the Southern Cross, by the rising and setting of planets and the familiar shapes traced by ancient astronomers who saw in random points of light the figures of gods and heroes and beasts. There is comfort in this knowledge, in understanding that the same stars that guide you tonight have guided countless sailors before you, that you are part of a tradition stretching back to the first humans who dared to leave sight of land and trust the heavens to lead them home. The first hint of dawn begins to show in the east, not light exactly but a subtle thinning of the darkness, a suggestion of gray where before there was only black. You watch this transformation with the attention it deserves, grateful as always for the return of the sun, for the promise of warmth however modest, for the simple fact of another night survived. The officer of the watch sees it too, and you notice his shoulders relax slightly, the unconscious easing of tension that comes when the dangerous hours between midnight and dawn have passed without incident. Below deck, men are beginning to stir. You hear sounds from the cabin, the creak of hammocks as bodies shift and wake, low voices murmuring, the thud of feet finding the deck. Soon the off-watch will emerge, their sleep finished whether they feel rested or not, and the rhythm of the day will resume, that pattern of work and rest, of meals and watches, that structures time at sea and gives shape to days that would otherwise blur into indistinguishable succession. You remain at the rail a few minutes longer, watching the light grow. The water is becoming visible now, no longer the featureless void of night but a textured surface, gentle swells catching the first rays of sun and reflecting them back in subtle shades of gray and silver. The ship rides these swells with easy grace, rising and falling in a motion so familiar you barely register it, your body adjusting automatically to the shifting deck beneath your feet. When you finally descend again to the cabin, the space has transformed. Hammocks are being rolled and stowed, the men moving through their morning routine with the efficient economy of long practice. Someone has lit a second lamp, and in its glow you can see faces more clearly, the exhaustion written in some, the stoic acceptance in others, the occasional flash of something like contentment in those rare souls who seem genuinely suited to this life. You move to your sea chest and retrieve your tin cup and plate, joining the line that forms near the galley where the cook is already preparing the morning meal. The food is nothing remarkable, the same biscuit and porridge you have eaten 1,000 times before, but it is hot, and that matters more than flavor. You cradle the bowl in your cold hands, letting the warmth seep into your fingers before you begin to eat. Around you, men gather in small groups, talking quietly or sitting in companionable silence. The mood is neither cheerful nor grim, but something in between, a kind of neutral endurance that characterizes most days at sea. There are no celebrations planned, no particular milestones to mark. This is simply another day, another increment in the slow progress from one port to another, another rotation of the watch, another cycle of work and rest, and the small rituals that make time bearable. After breakfast you return to the deck, where the sun has now fully risen, a pale disk in the eastern sky that offers light without much heat. The wind has picked up slightly, and the officer on watch calls for an adjustment to the sails. You join the crew at the lines, adding your strength to theirs, feeling the familiar burn in your shoulders and arms as the canvas is trimmed to catch the wind at a better angle. This is skilled work, requiring coordination and timing, and you take satisfaction in doing it well, in being part of a team that functions smoothly even under difficult conditions. The morning passes in a succession of small tasks. You repair a section of rattlin that has begun to fray, the tarred rope rough against your palms. You help move barrels in the hold, making space for repairs to a section of planking that has started to weep seawater. You stand a turn at the pumps, working the long handles in rhythm with another sailor, clearing the bilge of the water that accumulates there despite all efforts to keep the ship tight. None of these tasks is dramatic or noteworthy. Together they constitute the endless maintenance that keeps a wooden ship functional, the constant battle against rot and wear and the corrosive effects of salt water on everything it touches. By midday the sun has climbed high enough to provide a little genuine warmth, and you allow yourself a few moments of rest, sitting on a coil of rope near the foremast with your face turned toward the light. You close your eyes and let the sun touch your skin, feeling the cold that lives deep in your bones retreat slightly under its influence. Around you, other men have found similar perches, taking advantage of this brief gift of warmth before the afternoon watch demands their attention again. You think about the question of home, that complicated concept that shifts meaning the longer you stay at sea. There is the place you came from, the town or village or city you left behind, where perhaps family still lives, where rooms exist that once held your belongings and might still carry some trace of your presence. But that place has become abstract, a collection of memories that grow less vivid with each passing month. And then there is the ship itself, which is more immediately real, more present in every sense. You know this vessel intimately, know its moods and habits, know which parts are strong and which are weak, know how it responds to different seas and winds. You have slept within its hull through storms and calms, have eaten and worked and suffered and occasionally laughed within its confines. It is both prison and sanctuary, both the source of hardship and the means of survival. Perhaps home, you think, is simply wherever you sleep, wherever you lay your head down at night and close your eyes and trust that you will wake to see another day. By this definition, the cold cabin below deck qualifies, however uncomfortable it may be. It is the place you return to when exhaustion finally claims you, the space where you allow yourself to become vulnerable, where you surrender consciousness and hope that the ship, the sea, and your shipmates will keep you safe until morning. The afternoon brings a change in the weather. Clouds begin to move in from the west, not the dark threatening masses that signal a storm but high thin layers that diffuse the sunlight without blocking it entirely. The temperature drops again, and you retrieve your jacket from below, pulling it tight around your shoulders. The wind strengthens, and more sail is set to take advantage of it. The ship's pace increases, the bow beginning to throw spray as it cuts through the larger swells, and you taste salt on your lips. You are assigned to the afternoon watch, for hours standing ready to respond to orders, to adjust lines and monitor the sails and keep alert for any signs of trouble. It is not particularly demanding work most of the time, but it requires sustained attention. You cannot afford to drift into daydreams or lose track of what is happening around you. The sea permits no lapses. It waits for inattention, for the moment when concentration falters, and it punishes mistakes without mercy or delay. But you have learned how to maintain this alertness without exhausting yourself, how to stay present without becoming tense. You let your gaze move across the sails and rigging, checking for anything amiss, then sweep across the horizon, looking for other ships or changes in the weather, then return to the sails again, a constant rotation that keeps your mind engaged without overwhelming it. You listen to the sounds of the ship, that complex symphony of creaking wood and singing rope and rushing water, and you note any variations from the familiar patterns. You feel the wind on your face and register its strength and direction, aware of subtle shifts that might require action. This is the skill you have developed over years at sea, this capacity for sustained watchfulness that is neither paranoid nor complacent but something balanced between them. It is not glamorous work. No one writes songs about the watchstander who notices a line beginning to chafe or spots a change in wind direction early enough to adjust for it smoothly. But this quiet competence is what keeps ships safe, what prevents the small problems from becoming catastrophes. When your watch ends and you are relieved, you feel the familiar wave of fatigue that comes when sustained attention is finally allowed to relax. You make your way below, moving through the ship with the automatic navigation of long familiarity, and find your hammock in the cabin where other off-watch sailors are already sleeping or preparing to sleep. The space is dim and close, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and tired bodies, but you have long since stopped noticing these things except in the abstract. You climb into your hammock and pull your blanket around you, adjusting your position until you find the posture that will allow rest. The cold is there, as always, pressing against you through the thin fabric, seeping up from the deck below and down from the hull beside you. You tuck your hands under your arms to keep them warm and pull your knees up slightly, making yourself as compact as possible, conserving what heat your body generates against the chill that wants to steal it away. Around you, men settle into their own rest. Someone coughs, a deep wet sound that speaks of too many nights in damp cold. Someone else mutters in his sleep, words too low to make out, perhaps arguing with some dream adversary or calling to someone far away. The ship rolls gently on the evening swell, and the hammocks sway in response, that rocking motion that is sometimes comforting and sometimes nauseating depending on the state of the sea and your own constitution. You lie there in the darkness with your eyes closed, listening to the breathing of the men around you, to the creaking of the ship, to the distant sound of waves against the hull. You are not quite asleep but not quite awake either, drifting in that borderland that has become so familiar, that state where thoughts flow without direction, where memories and sensations blend into something like dreams but more fragmented, more fluid. You remember other nights like this, so many they blur together into a continuous experience of cold and darkness and the patient endurance of discomfort. You remember storms when the ship pitched so violently that sleep was impossible, when you lay braced in your hammock trying not to be thrown out, listening to the shriek of wind and the thunder of seas against the hull and wondering if this time the vessel would prove unequal to the challenge. You remember calms when the ship sat motionless on glassy water and the heat below deck became suffocating, when men brought their hammocks up to sleep under the stars because the cabins were unbearable. You remember periods of illness when fever made you shiver despite layers of blankets, when dreams turned strange and frightening and you woke not knowing where you were or how long you had been sleeping. But you remember other moments too. You remember the first time you successfully identified a constellation on your own, tracing the pattern the old sailor had shown you until you suddenly saw it clearly, saw how those scattered points of light formed a recognizable shape. You remember a morning when dolphins appeared alongside the ship, dozens of them leaping and playing in the bow wave, their bodies sleek and joyful in the early light, and how the entire crew stopped their work to watch, united in wonder at the beauty of these creatures who seemed to move through their element with such effortless grace. You remember a night when the aurora appeared, great curtains of green and blue light rippling across the northern sky, and how you stood on deck with your shipmates in silent awe at this phenomenon that seemed to belong to some realm beyond ordinary experience. These memories are part of the compensation the sea offers for its hardships, these moments of beauty and strangeness that you would never encounter in a life ashore. They do not erase the cold or the exhaustion or the danger, but they add another dimension to experience, a sense that despite everything difficult about this existence, it also contains wonders that most people never witness, that there is a kind of privilege in being out here, in living so close to the fundamental forces of wind and water, in seeing the world from perspectives that remain hidden to those who never leave land. You drift deeper toward sleep, your body gradually relaxing despite the cold, your mind releasing its grip on conscious thought. The boundary between waking and sleeping grows thinner, and you begin to lose track of which thoughts are yours and which are dreams, which sounds come from the cabin around you and which exist only in your mind. Somewhere in this borderland, you find yourself remembering your first voyage, how strange and overwhelming everything seemed, how certain you were that you would never adapt to this life, that you would remain forever an outsider to this world of sailors and ships and endless water. You remember the fear you felt the first time you climbed the ratlins to work aloft, how impossible it seemed that you could function on those swaying yards with nothing but rope and your own balance to keep you from falling. You remember your first storm, the terror of it, the absolute conviction that the ship would founder and you would die in the cold dark water far from anything familiar. But you did not die. The ship survived. And you climbed the ratlins again and again until it became routine, until you could move through the rigging with confidence even in rough weather. You endured storm after storm, and gradually you learned that while each one was dangerous, while any of them could indeed prove fatal, most of them passed and the ship sailed on, and you woke the next morning to find yourself still alive, still part of the crew, still moving toward whatever destination the voyage had set. This is perhaps the deepest lesson the sea teaches, this understanding that you are more resilient than you imagined, that you can endure conditions you once thought impossible, that the boundaries of what you can survive are much wider than you believed when you lived ashore in comfort and security. It is not always a pleasant lesson. Sometimes you wish you could return to ignorance, to the soft assumptions of those who have never truly tested themselves against difficulty. But the knowledge is there now, inescapable, woven into your understanding of yourself and the world. You sleep, finally, dropping into that deeper rest where dreams become more coherent, where narratives unfold with their own strange logic. You dream of home, though in the dream home is a place you have never actually seen, a composite of memory and imagination, familiar and foreign at once. You dream of warmth, of sitting before a fire with your hands stretched toward the flames, feeling heat sink into your skin and drive out the chill that has lived in your bones for so long. You dream of walking on solid ground that does not move beneath your feet, of trees and grass and the smell of earth instead of salt water. But even in the dream, part of you remains aware of where you actually are, aware of the hammock swaying gently beneath you, aware of the cold pressing against your skin, aware of the ship moving through dark water under a sky full of stars. This double consciousness is common in sailors' dreams, this inability to fully leave the present even in sleep, as if some part of the mind must always remain on watch, always alert to danger, never completely surrendering to unconsciousness. You wake some hours later to the sound of the watch changing, to voices in the passageway and the thud of feet on the ladder. You lie still for a moment, reluctant to leave the relative warmth you have created beneath your blanket, but you know that remaining here will not make the cold any less when you finally do emerge, that the only thing that makes it bearable is movement, is getting up and getting on with the business of living. You swing your legs out and lower yourself to the deck once more, your feet finding the cold planks, your body protesting the transition from rest to activity. Around you, other men are stirring, preparing for the night watch or simply waking because their bodies have learned the rhythms of the ship and no longer require full rest to function. You can see exhaustion in their faces, in the slow careful way they move, in the silence that speaks of energy conserved for necessary tasks rather than wasted on unnecessary conversation. You make your way to the deck once more, emerging into night air that seems colder than before, that carries an edge suggesting the temperature has dropped even further. The stars burn overhead with that crystalline clarity that comes on the coldest nights, and you can see your breath pluming white in the darkness. The deck is slippery with ice where spray has frozen, and you move carefully, testing your footing with each step. The officer of the watch acknowledges your arrival with a nod, and you take your place among the night crew, ready to respond to whatever the hours ahead might bring. The ship moves through the darkness, a small world of wood and rope and human determination, carrying its complement of cold and tired men across water that extends beyond sight in every direction. You think about all the other ships scattered across the world's oceans, each one carrying its own crew, its own cargo of hopes and fears and exhaustion. On some of them, men are sleeping in cabins much like yours, wrapped in thin blankets against the cold, trusting their shipmates to keep watch while they rest. On others, crews are fighting storms, struggling to keep their vessels afloat against seas that want to tear them apart. And on still others, men are dying, succumbing to disease or accident or simply to the accumulated wear of too many years at sea in conditions that slowly grind down even the strongest constitution. But they continue, all of them, all the ships and all the sailors, maintaining the network of trade and travel that connects continents, that makes possible the exchange of goods and ideas and people across distances that would otherwise remain insurmountable. It is not heroic work most of the time. It is simply work, hard and cold and dangerous, undertaken because it needs to be done, because there are places that can only be reached by sea, because humanity has always been driven to cross boundaries, to see what lies beyond the horizon, to connect the separated parts of the world into something resembling a whole. The night deepens. The cold intensifies. You stand your watch, attending to the sails and the rigging and the endless small adjustments that keep the ship on course. Your hands grow numb despite your gloves, and you flex them periodically to maintain circulation, to keep them functional. Your feet lose sensation inside your boots, and you stamp them gently on the deck, trying to generate warmth through movement without making enough noise to disturb the sleepers below. Above you, the sails fill and empty with the breathing of the wind, that sound like great inhalations and exhalations, as if the ship itself were a living thing drawing breath from the air that drives it forward. You have always found this sound strangely comforting, this evidence that the vessel is doing what it was built to do, that the complex system of wood and rope and canvas is functioning as intended, translating the invisible force of moving air into the visible progress of a ship crossing water. When your watch ends and you descend once more to the cabin, you find the space unchanged, still cold, still dim, still crowded with sleeping men. You return to your hammock and climb in, pulling your blanket around you with hands that barely have the dexterity to grip the fabric. The cold has penetrated deep now, and you know from experience that it will take some time before your body can generate enough heat to make sleep comfortable. But you also know that sleep will come eventually, that your exhaustion will overcome your discomfort, that you will drift away into that realm where the cold matters less, where dreams offer their own form of escape. And you know that when you wake, whether in an hour or 4 or 6, the ship will still be moving, still carrying you toward whatever destination this voyage has set, still providing that minimal shelter against the sea that makes survival possible. This is the bargain you have made, the exchange you accepted when you came aboard. You trade comfort for purpose, security for adventure, the warmth of home for the cold freedom of open water. You endure the freezing cabins and the exhaustion and the danger because this life, for all its hardships, offers something you could not find ashore, something you cannot quite name but recognize as essential, as fundamental to who you have become. You lie in your hammock with your eyes closed, listening to the familiar sounds of the ship at night, feeling the gentle roll of the deck beneath you, and you let yourself relax into this moment, this exact point in time where you are neither asleep nor awake, neither warm nor unbearably cold, neither comfortable nor suffering beyond endurance. You exist in the middle space, the realm of gradual adaptation, of learned resilience, of the slow transformation that changes ordinary men into sailors. And in this moment, surrounded by your sleeping shipmates, held by the swaying hammock, rocked by the motion of the ship, you find a kind of peace. It is not the peace of ease or luxury or freedom from worry. It is the peace of acceptance, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you can endure this, that you have endured it many times before and will endure it many times again, that this cold cabin and this thin blanket and this tiredness that goes deeper than one night's sleep can reach are simply the conditions of your existence, no better or worse than any other life's conditions, just different, just yours. The ship sails on through the darkness, and you drift towards sleep once more, your mind releasing its grip on consciousness, your body surrendering to rest despite the cold that never entirely goes away. Tomorrow there will be another watch to stand, another day of work to complete, another night of cold to endure. But that is tomorrow's concern. For now, in this moment, you are here, alive, part of this community of men who have learned to sleep in freezing cabins at sea, who have mastered the art of rest under impossible conditions, who carry within them the knowledge that they can survive almost anything, even this. The waves whisper against the hull, ancient and patient, and the stars will slowly overhead, indifferent and eternal, and somewhere far away dawn is already beginning to break over lands you may or may not ever see, over lives you may or may not ever touch. But here, in this cold cabin on this moving ship on this dark water, you close your eyes and let the exhaustion take you, trusting in the morning to come, trusting in the ship to hold, trusting in your shipmates to keep the watch while you finally, gratefully, allow yourself to sleep.